The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the Survivor and Neutral cards from the Forgotten Age, the third deluxe expansion for the Arkham Horror LCG. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. We got 5 cards to go through, so let's get started. The first Survivor card in the box is Improvised Weapon. It's a 1-cost event with the tactic and improvised traits. It has the game text, you may play Improvised Weapon from your discard pile. If you do, shuffle it into your deck after resolving its effects. Fight. The attacked enemy gets -1 fight for this attack. If you played Improvised Weapon from your discard pile, this attack deals +1 damage. Survivors are all about making do with the tools at hand, and Improvised Weapon fits that theme perfectly. Generally speaking, a negative modifier to an enemy's fight value is better than a positive modifier for you, especially if you can reduce that enemy's fight value to 0. For example, if Calvin Wright has 0 combat and is fighting a swarm of rats while armed with a knife, he needs to pull a 0 or better from the Chaos Bag or he'll fail the skill test. That can be a tall order depending on the value of the tokens in the Chaos Bag. If Calvin Wright is fighting a swarm of rats with an improvised weapon, on the other hand, the only token that will cause him to fail that skill test is the tentacle. So the improvised weapon is better in this case. Unfortunately, there simply aren't that many enemies with a fight value of 1. Besides the ubiquitous swarm of rats from the core set, there are only 2 other enemies in the game with a fight value of 1. The Conglomeration of Spheres from the Dunwich Legacy campaign, and Salvatore Neri, an enemy from Carnival of Horrors. Improvised Weapon actually works pretty well against both of those enemies. You can play it from your hand for a damage unless you draw a tentacle, then play it again from your discard pile for another 2 damage, again as long as you don't draw the tentacle. That's going to be enough to kill Neri and take a significant chunk of health from a conglomeration without putting a melee weapon at risk. Ideally, an investigator wants to play Improvised Weapon from his or her discard pile to get that -1 fight modifier and the +1 damage. One thing worth noting about Improvised Weapon is that it does not have any skill icons. If you want to get Improvised Weapon into your discard pile, that means one of 2 things. You need to take a vanilla fight action with Improvised Weapon, which isn't that great even with the -1 modifier, or you need to find some way to discard it. Ashcan Pete and Wendy Adams are in a good position to use Improvised Weapon since both have abilities that let them discard cards. Ashcan can discard Improvised Weapon to ready Duke, while Wendy can discard Improvised Weapon to redraw a Chaos token. Once Improvised Weapon is in the discard pile, it becomes a 1-shot 45 automatic that costs 1 resource and goes back into your deck after use. Improvised Weapon is also good in Wendy because, as some players have pointed out on the forums, it's an easy way for her to reshuffle her draw deck after she has placed several events at the bottom of it using Wendy's amulet. It's worth noting that Improvised Weapon has the tactic trait, so it can go in a Mark Harrigan deck, although I'm not really sure why you would bother with it, though, considering Harrigan has access to a lot better weapons. He has a lot better weapons at his disposal, including the survival knife that was also in the Forgotten Age box. I've been running hot and cold on Improvised Weapons since the Forgotten Age Deluxe expansion dropped, and currently I'd say I'm lukewarm. I like the look of this card in investigators such as Ashcan Pete and Wendy Adams, since both of them have an easy way to get Improvised Weapon into the discard pile. I'm less enthusiastic about it if the investigator has to spend 1 action and take a fight action to play it from his or her hand, then spend another resource and a fight action to play it from his or her discard pile. I think it's worth keeping an eye out for cards that let a survivor discard cards from his or her hand, in which case I think Improvised Weapon stock goes up. I could see playing Improvised Weapon at the start of a campaign to deal with those annoying enemies, especially if you're playing multiplayer and taking on enemies isn't your primary role. A card like Improvised Weapon comes in handy to help you deal with those annoying enemies like the swarm of rats. However, I think once the enemies get tougher, or if you're playing in solo, I think Improvised Weapon's effectiveness starts to go down fast, and you're going to have to look at moving up to a better survivor weapon like the fire axe or the baseball bat. The second survivor card in the box is Dumb Luck. It's a 2-cost event with 2 agility skill icons and the fortune trait. It has the game text Fast. Play after you fail a skill test by 2 or less during an evasion attempt against a non-elite enemy. Place that enemy on top of the encounter deck. This is the type of card that makes me think, what am I missing? Because Dumb Luck doesn't look very good at first glance, especially if you play a lot of solo like I do. If I fail an evade action, which I try to avoid if at all possible, I can play Dumb Luck to place the non-elite enemy on top of the encounter deck, so I can redraw it again next round. That does not impress me very much, although it is nice to know what's coming off the top of the encounter deck during the next Mythos phase. I guess it could also be helpful if you're having trouble dealing with one enemy. The last thing you need to do is draw a second off the top of the encounter deck. Dumb Luck can help you prevent that type of situation. You're still going to have to deal with an enemy next round, but at least it's only one enemy, not 2. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. Dumb Luck is the latest in a series of cards with the fortune trait that were introduced in the core set. First there was Look What I Found, which is easily the best of the bunch. Discovering 2 clues when you're going to discover 0 clues is nothing short of amazing. It's a really little wonder Look What I Found is a staple of many Survivor and off-class Survivor decks. Then along came Oops in the Miskatonic Museum, and it has, I think, many players thinking the designers made an Oops, because Oops is about as corner case as a card comes. I've played Oops in a Wendy Adams deck for the 2 combat skill icons, but I've never used it for its ability, because it has such a high opportunity cost, and I suspect many players are in the same situation. This card spends most of its time safely stowed in my binder, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And now we've got Dumb Luck, which feels like it has a lot more in common with Oops than Look What I Found. Certainly, Look What I Found's, discovering 2 clues is amazing. Placing an enemy on top of the encounter deck, not so much. Now I can think of a few circumstances where playing Dumb Luck would be useful. Let's say you're playing Wendy Adams and you're engaged with a ghoul minion. As your first action you try to evade, but it fails by 2 or less, so you can play Dumb Luck, bouncing the ghoul minion to the top of the encounter deck. At this point you've bought yourself some time. You have 2 actions left to work with on your turn, so you'd better make the most of them. You can grab a clue, move to a better location, or play an asset or 2 to prepare for that enemy's eventual return. That's not too bad as long as you have a plan to deal with the enemy the following round. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself right back at square one. And you're not going to have Dumb Luck in your hand still to deal with that ghoul. Although if you've got Wendy's amulet out, Wendy could play Dumb Luck again from the discard pile because it is an event. Dumb Luck works well if the enemy in question has spawn instructions. If you fail the agility test by 2 or less, you can play Dumb Luck and bounce the enemy back to the encounter deck. Then you can move away from the location in question, and when you draw that enemy during the next Mythos phase, it will spawn back at the location. As long as that enemy is not a hunter, you may not have to deal with it again, so that's a very handy way of using Dumb Luck to get rid of an enemy. You could also use Dumb Luck to bounce an enemy with Doom on it back to the encounter deck, removing that Doom from play in order to prevent the agenda from advancing. This could work in a pinch against an enemy such as the Wizard of the Order. If you fail the skill test by 2 or less and play Dumb Luck to bounce the Wizard of the Order, you remove that doom from play and the wizard will respawn at an empty location, which means you don't necessarily need to deal with it the following round. The only problem with this plan, of course, is that the Wizard of the Order has an evade value of 2, which is lower than the agility of most survivors in the game. And it's quite difficult to fail a skill test on purpose in this game. I guess Wendy Adams could probably pitch a card from her hand to redraw a token if she passed and was trying to fail, but I really don't see that as being a good use of her ability, unless you were really, really desperate. If you're playing in multiplayer, you could use Dumb Luck to send an enemy into the waiting arms of a Guardian. Let's say you run into the Wizard of Yogg-Sothoth while you're playing extracurricular activity. You fail the evade action and play Dumb Luck to bounce the wizard to the back to the top of the encounter deck. As long as the Guardian is the lead investigator, he or she will draw that wizard during the next Mythos phase, not you. So not only have you removed the wizard from your threat area, but now the Guardian can take it, and the Guardian should be in a much better position to take it out and score those victory points, and everybody benefits in that situation. I've been on a bit of a survivor kick lately, and I've been trying to make note of situations when Dumb Luck would come in handy during my games. Honestly, I haven't come up with that many. While I can think of a few situations where Dumb Luck would be useful, many of those situations are quite corner case, and they're rarely going to come up during play, or they're going to require some setup on your part, which raises this card's opportunity cost. Most of the time, I suspect you're going to end up committing Dumb Luck to the skill test for its 2 agility skill icons, which may well be the best thing about this card. Look what I found set the bar pretty high for fortune cards, and Oops and Dumb Luck haven't really come close to clearing that bar since then. Perhaps we'll see a scenario at some point during this cycle where Dumb Luck is worth its weight in gold, but for now I think it's going to struggle to make the cut in my decks. But as with cards like this, it's always a good idea to just keep an eye out if you're playing Survivor and maybe keep track of situations, and maybe you will find that Dumb Luck, there is a situation where Dumb Luck will pay off for you. The third Survivor card in the box is a new ally. This is Yodle, Lost Son of Estli. He costs 3 resources, 1 experience point, and he has a willpower skill icon. He has the ally and wayfarer traits, 2 health and 2 sanity, and takes up an ally slot. He has 2 free triggered abilities, Exhaust Yodle. During this skill test, you get a bonus to each skill equal to the number of matching skill icons on the top card of your discard pile, not counting wild skill icons. And discard the top card of your deck, limit once per turn. Here is a fascinating ally that's been generating a lot of buzz among Survivor players, such as Sergeant Mook, who I recently interviewed on the channel. And if you haven't had a chance to check out that interview, I really suggest you do. He has a lot of interesting insights into playing Survivor investigators. I wasn't sure what to make of Yodle at first, but I think his ability is proving to be quite powerful in at least 2 investigators, and possibly others as well. Let's start off with his first free trigger, which gives you a bonus to each skill equal to the number of matching skill icons on the top card of your discard pile. Ashcan Pete and Wendy Adams are 2 Survivor investigators who rely on the discard mechanic to power their abilities. One of the side effects of all those discards is that those investigators tend to have fewer cards in their hand to commit to skill tests. Yodle and the next card in this pack, Last Chance, help to mitigate the impact of those discards somewhat. You may not have enough cards in your hand to commit to a skill test, but as long as Yodle is in play and you've got the right card on the top of your discard pile, you may be able to cobble together some sort of skill bonus for that test. Now, you've got a couple of different options when it comes to the right card. You can go for versatility and stuff your deck with cards that have a lot of different skill icons, like Not Without a Fight from the Black Stars Rise expansion. you're only going to get +1 to your skill value, but you've got almost all of your bases covered when it comes to skill tests. Another option is to go for raw power with cards that double up on a single skill icon. Most of the neutral skill cards from the core set fit the bill here. Of course, Unexpected Courage does not, since Yodle does not work with the wild skill icons. And if you're really up against it, you can try to go for one of the desperate skills that was released in Echoes of the Past. The beauty of using the desperate skills with Yodle is that you don't need to meet the sanity requirement if they are on top of your discard pile. The only thing that Yodle cares about is the icons, and adding 4 to your skill value is about as good as it gets in this game. So Yodle and the desperate skills is an obvious combination. There are two very important points to remember about Yodle. First, Yodle doesn't remember the skill icons that were on the top of your discard pile at the time you exhaust him. If you can find a way to change the top card of your discard pile after you exhaust Yodle, say with his second free triggered ability, you get a bonus to each skill based on the new top card of your discard pile, not the old one. The second point is that Yodle's ability stacks if you can find a way to exhaust him multiple times. A few tricky players have already found one way of doing that with Ashcan Pete. The trick goes something like this. First you exhaust Yodle, and at this point the top card of your discard pile is really irrelevant because you're planning on changing it anyway. Then you use Ashcan Pete's free triggered ability to discard whichever desperate skill card is appropriate for the skill test to ready an asset you control. Now, most of the time Ashcan Pete is using this ability to ready Duke, but in this case you want to ready Yodle instead. What happens here is that desperate skill card is now on the top of your discard pile, so you are receiving a +4 bonus to your skill value. Then you exhaust Yodle again. Now you're receiving a +8 bonus to your skill value because you've exhausted Yodle twice. I don't think I have to tell you how amazing that is, especially on harder expert difficulty. If you can gain +8 to your skill value, that's going to go a long way to mitigating some of those really negative tokens in that harder expert chaos bag. If you don't want to get really tricksy, you can always commit a desperate skill card, say Desperate Search, to an intellect skill test to get +4 to your skill value. Then following an investigate action, you can exhaust Yodle to get another +4 skill bonus to your skill value, since the desperate skill is on top of your discard pile. The following turn, you can exhaust Yodle again to gain another +4 skill value for another investigate action. At this point, you've essentially committed the same desperate search to 3 different skill tests. Wendy Adams can also take advantage of Yodle's ability when she discards a card to redraw a chaos token. If Wendy pitches a desperate skill after exhausting Yodle, she gets +4 to the skill value and the redraw, which is pretty great. She can also use Yodle's second ability to dump cards into her discard pile. If those cards happen to be events, Wendy can play them using Wendy's Amulet. Speaking of Yodle's second ability, it has a couple of other interesting uses. As I mentioned earlier, if you really need to pass a skill test with the icons on the top card of your discard pile don't match the test, Yodle can try to fix the situation for you. It's a bit of a crapshoot, but if you're desperate, it's worth a shot, and discarding that card may be the difference between success and failure. If you have some way to search the top card of your deck, say with a Mystic event like Scrying or the Mystic ally Alyssa Graham, you can check to see if you're going to draw your weakness. Now, if the weakness is on the top of your deck, you can use Yodle's free trigger to discard it before it becomes an issue. It's a little bit fiddly, but it would certainly work in a pinch. And if your weakness is particularly terrible, I would much rather use Yodle's ability to discard it so you don't have to worry about it. Whenever I see Yodle, I always think of Yodle the Turtle of Yodle the Turtle fame for some reason, but that's neither here nor there. This Lost Son of Esley is a powerful addition to the Survivor card pool that really rewards clever play. He's already found a home in many Ashcan Pete decks that try to abuse the desperate skills, and I think Wendy likes him quite a bit as well. I expect players are going to try him out in other investigators as the cycle continues. Somebody like Agnes, if you want to try to get rid of her weaknesses using Alyssa, or you might even try Yodle in a Lola deck as well, since she can take him because he's only cost 1 experience point. The 4th survivor card in the box is Last Chance. It's a skill with 5, count 'em, 5 wild skill icons and the Gambit trait. It has the game text, commit only to a skill test with no other cards committed to it. Other cards cannot be committed to this skill test. Last Chance loses a wild skill icon for each card in your hand. Last Chance is one of those cards that plays into the survivor theme of flying by the seat of your pants, scrounging for a card here, a resource there as you battle the Mythos. In this case, you're scrounging up a few skill icons to pass a skill test. Ashcan Pete and Wendy Adams are the strongest contenders to run this card since both investigators feature discard mechanics. Ashcan can discard 1 card every round to ready Duke, while Wendy can discard a card once per test to redraw a Chaos token. All of those discards can start to add up after a few rounds, leaving Ashcan and Wendy with few options available to them if they need to commit a card or 2 to pass a critical skill test. Last Chance fills that gap in their game plan. You won't be able to commit other cards to the skill test if you commit Last Chance, but you shouldn't really need to if Last Chance is worth 4 or even 5 wild skill icons. While Last Chance seems like an ideal choice for Ashcan and Wendy, I would consider playing it in other investigators as well. If you've got 3 cards in your hand when you play Last Chance, it's just as good as an Unexpected Courage, which I still play in most of my decks because it is so versatile. If you're playing Survivor, Last Chance could either replace Unexpected Courage or supplement it. Personally, I like the idea of having 2 extra copies of Unexpected Courage in my deck if I have the space available, and Last Chance could be that or even better depending on how many cards are in your hand. Last Chance also synergizes with all of the lovely recursion tech that's in the Survivor class. If you've got a few cards left in your hand, you could do a lot worse than grabbing Last Chance from the discard pile with a Resourceful. And William York can pull off the same trick if he pulls an Elder Sign during a skill test. And it's also important to remember, don't forget about Silas Marsh, the new Survivor and Investigator released in the Deep Gate novella. Silas is all about the skills. His response enables him to return a skill he committed to a test to his hand after he reveals a Chaos token, while his Elder Sign ability lets him commit a skill from his discard pile. Better yet, he gets to return that skill to his hand after the skill test ends. Last Chance seems like it's going to be great in a Silas deck. If he can find a way to keep a few cards in hand, he could commit Last Chance to a skill test, bouncing it back to his hand if he doesn't happen to need the skill icons to pass that test. And if Last Chance ends up in his discard pile, Silas can get it back with his Elder Sign ability. That sounds pretty sweet to me. One of the dangers of leveraging cards like Ashcan Pete, Wendy Adams, or Madame Labranche, the Survivor patron released in A Phantom of Truth, is that you'll have few cards available to commit to skill tests. Last Chance solves that problem. You may only have 1 or 2 cards left in your hand to commit to a skill test, but if one of those cards is worth 4 or even 5 wild skill icons, your odds of passing that skill test just got a big shot in the arm. Given survivors have several ways to recur Last Chance, the card looks like it's going to be a very strong contender for many different types of survivor decks. And I'm looking forward to giving it a shot in Silas, especially once my copy of the Deep Gate arrives. There's only one neutral card in the Forgotten Age Deluxe expansion, and that is Backpack. It's a 2-cost asset with an agility skill icon and the item trait. It has the game text Response. After Backpack enters play, search the top 6 cards of your deck for up to 3 non-weakness item or supply cards and attach them face down to Backpack. Shuffle your deck. Cards attached to Backpack may be played as if they were in your hand. If there are no cards attached to Backpack, discard it. Backpack will take up a body slot. What would an expedition themed expansion be without some way of carting all of your gear into the jungle? Backpack does pretty much what you would expect a backpack to do. It lets you rifle through the top 6 cards of your deck for up to 3 cards with the item or supply trait, and then it holds them for you until you've got a chance to play them. There are a couple things worth noting about Backpack. First, it's only the second neutral tutor in the game, the first being Calling in Favors from the Unspeakable Oath. And second, most tutors in this game let you search the top X cards of your deck for only 1 card. Backpack lets you search the top of your deck for up to 3 cards, which is quite generous as tutors go. Backpack is a neutral card, so it's playable in pretty much every investigator under the sun. Obviously, your deck should contain a fair number of cards with the item or supply trait in it before you consider slotting in Backpack. How many cards with the item or supply trait do you need before you consider bringing along a backpack to carry all those goodies? Well, I took a quick peek at the decks over at Arkham DB, and most of them that include backpacks seem to play anywhere from 10 to 14 item or supply cards. If anywhere from a third to half of your deck is made up of cards with the item or supply trait, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to find a few of them when you trigger Backpack's response. I have my doubts that you're going to find 3 cards with the item or supply trait every time you search with Backpack, so you may have to just settle for 1 or 2 most of the time. I'm kind of surprised the Backpack takes up a body slot. I guess the designers thought it would be OP if you could wear a leather coat or fine clothes and carry a backpack at the same time. There aren't many assets that compete for the body slot at the moment, but if those assets happen to be the items that you want to search for, there is going to be a conflict with Backpack, and I think that's a bit of a shame, and it takes Backpack down a peg or two in my view, considering leather coat is such a good card in many different decks. The cards attached to Backpack are not considered to be in your hand, which reduces the risk of them being discarded during a campaign, such as the Dunwich Legacy. However, Backpack itself is vulnerable to asset hate. That may be a problem during the Forgotten Age campaign, judging by the presence of cards such as Low Supplies, which happens to feature a very damaged Backpack, or Crypt Chill in the first 2 scenarios. That said, if you're playing Backpack, you're probably playing plenty of assets, which you could discard instead if you get an unlucky pull from the encounter deck. It's not a big deal, but it's something worth keeping in mind if your only asset on the table is a fully loaded Backpack. That would be an extremely painful thing to lose if you happen to get a bad pull off the encounter deck. Honestly, I wasn't all that excited about Backpack when it was spoiled in the Forgotten Age preview article months ago, and I'm even less so now that I've had a chance to test the card. The deck I was playing had 14 item or supply cards in it, but when 4 of those cards are either leather coat or fine clothes, Backpack doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The other problem with Backpack is that you've got to draw it before you can actually tutor anything up with it, and that means in some games you're going to see it, and in other games you're not. So it's you've got all of these items, but without a way to tutor them unless you see that Backpack. If I was traveling, I would never consider leaving home without a good backpack. It's just that important to having a good trip. This backpack, however, doesn't really strike me as essential. If you're playing a lot of cards with the item or supply trait, by all means, put backpack in your deck and give it a try. But I wouldn't hesitate to cut it for a more impactful card either. Certainly in the deck I've been playing it in, it hasn't really performed quite as well as I had hoped. That's going to do it for my review of the Survivor cards in the Forgotten Age. Ashcan Pete and Wendy Adams make off like bandits with this collection of cards, many of which support decks that rely on discard mechanics. I haven't decided whether I like Improvised Weapon, but I think a copy or two could be useful in certain decks at the beginning of a campaign. Dumb Luck isn't the worst fortune card that's been printed, but it's certainly not the best either. It can be helpful if you're struggling with one enemy and don't want to draw another. However, I'd be willing to bet that most players are going to put this in their decks with the best of intentions and then end up simply committing it to a skill test for its 2 agility skill icons. Yodle and Last Chance give decks that rely on discard mechanics a way to shore up their skill tests. Yodle in particular seems ripe for abuse. It's going to be interesting to see whether the designers take a second look at him down the road, depending on what decks he appears in. All in all, I think the Forgotten Age is an extremely solid box, and I can't wait to see what the cycle has in store for us. Each of the classes receives some really interesting cards, and when I look back at my reviews, I can't think there's not many duds among them. I think the rogues probably get the worst of the deal, and I really like that. I really like the synergy that the Seeker cards have. The Mystics really go all in on math in this expansion, and it's going to take some time, I think, before we really see whether that seal mechanic is going to pay off or not. Part of me makes me, the math that I've done anyway, makes me think that it's not worth all the effort. But we've got six packs to go and 6 scenarios, so it's going to be interesting to see how that mechanic develops. And Guardians, they do really well. They actually get a decent weapon for a change, which is nice to see. So all in all, a good box, a nice box for a beginning player, since they can basically take those Seeker cards and dump them all in a deck, and they're good to go. And there's something for the more experienced player as well. Cards like Yodle that really reward you for testing the limits of what this game can do. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this cycle plays out. And it looks like Threads of Fate will be coming out, I believe it's this week. So I'll have the reviews for those cards as we continue, as I do for all the chapter packs as they come out. That's going to do it for my review. If you enjoyed it, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.